Achtung! Welcome to We Have Ways of Making You Talk with me, Al Murray, and James Holland, of course. And I'm in Glasgow, Jim. Where are you?
I'm in Brixton. I'm at my bro's place. I've just hot-footed it down from Coventry because I was playing in a fun cricket match yesterday for Ian Bell, and there were all sorts of the great and the good there. So that was good fun. But tell me, how's it been this weekend? Is it slightly odd, or is it absolutely just slotted straight back in?
There's been on Friday we had a minute's silence before the gig in Reading, but there was there is no discernible change in mood at my shows. I don't think. I mean, no. I do a tiny bit of It's What She Would Have Wanted, me taking the piss out of the bloke in the front row. They seem to broadly agree with that idea. So, no, I've not noticed a change in tone. And in Glasgow last night, not either, which is supposedly where you might expect a little wrinkle, but not really, no. I mean, as a comic, there's so much else to talk about as well, and also I kind of think we're in the middle of this, so digesting it and coming up with some interesting material about it is for the week after next, or for the future, or for later in the year, rather than right now in the middle of it. I mean, that maybe some might say that where's my fearless blade of satire in that situation?
Well, you got to be pretty careful with 70-year-old monarchs passing, haven't you? That probably requires a little bit of thought.
I suppose no, but it's interesting because we on Friday we did that. Friday morning we recorded and then put out that podcast about the Queen's War, and I noticed on your Facebook someone going, "Oh, I don't think Al's much of a royalist," judging by the way we talked about it. It's very interesting because I just thought we were. Well, I just thought we were talking about the history, and I think you have to talk about the royal family in their context as part of the propaganda machine in the Second World War. You can't not.
Yeah.
And be dispassionate about that.
Remotely anti-monarchist.
Well, no, nor did I. But I think it's just really interesting how people's sensitivities operate.
Yeah.
And how their ears are sensitive to different things that you might not realise are there. But anyway, but no, it's all been great. It's all been groovy, and
good.
There's been the
always nice being in Glasgow as well.
Yeah, it is. It's always nice being here, and it was raining yesterday when we arrived, but it's a beautiful morning this morning. But you were at the Test match as well.
So I was at the Test match. I was at the Test match on Saturday, which was very moving and absolutely the right decision. And you just thought, actually, I went with Tony. It was great. And then you kind of think, what were the Football Association thinking? I mean, really badly misjudging that one. We had a great day. And then yesterday I was playing this cricket match. It was fun. And actually, one of the people who was there was Jack Stein, who's the restaurateur, chef, son of Rick, and a really, really, really nice guy. Really good fun. And we got chatting, and he listens to the pod a bit, and he's got amazing German heritage. I mean, proper, really good German heritage. And he's got some fantastic stories about kind of sort of family, because his family left Germany at the very end of the 19th century. And then a few years ago, they had this big, Stein reunion in Dusseldorf. And him and Rick were going over basically sort of thinking, whatever you do, don't mention the war, don't mention the war. And he found that all the Steins wanted to talk about was the war. Really funny.
Really?
Yeah, all his old German relatives and stuff, and what they'd all got up to. And there were sort of various whiffs of Nazis in there. Anyway, but the main thing is I was saying, oh God, Alan and I think of doing this kind of, we just sort of talking about doing this wartime, British wartime, 1940 only diet for Lent. And he said, well, I'd love to come on the pod and talk about that, and talk about what you could do with the ingredients and all that kind of stuff. And I suddenly thought, actually, we could turn this into a bit of a thing.
Yeah, it's a 30-minute meals thing, isn't it?
Yeah. But there's another thing he wants to cover, which is these flying boats that went from Australia to then Ceylon during the war, delivering basically mail. Apparently they were kind of like 36 hours they took with kind of, he was saying non-stop. I thought, that is a great story.
That is a great story. Non-stop, that can't be.
It can't be true,
be
but
right?
it can't be if it's a flying boat.
No.
It's
but
maybe,
you land at a naval auxiliary vessel and refuel, and then move on. Surely.
But anyway, I thought, well, that is fascinating. So he gave me lots of food for thought there, literally. No pun intended.
Yeah, brilliant. Oh, excellent.
But anyway, he's a really, really nice guy.
Yeah, but where we got to, and you're going, this is being recorded Monday morning, you're going to this morning's test match where there's 30 runs or something to be put on the board and then England win, right?
Yeah. And I should just say, for anyone who doesn't understand what we're talking about cricket. You know, we'll move on very, very quickly. But for those who don't know, there are matches that can last 5 days, and there are lunch breaks and tea breaks in between them. And for anyone who's not English, it all seems a bit silly and odd. But for me, it's great.
It's a mystery. Yeah. Yeah. Well, so last week we were talking about 1939 and the build-up to the war and the various players and the role of American finance, of American soft power, as it were, in creating tensions within Europe, arguably, and all that stuff. And we talked a bit about Daladier and France, and I mean, I think what I was reflecting on that this morning when I got up is that. We often characterise France as, you know, it's chaotic governments, it's sclerotic in its political scene. You've got, I mean, it's the way the French do it, isn't it? It's that you end up with a government no one wants. I mean, you look at Macron this year. They end up with a president none of them really voted for, but they know that they can't have the other ones either. It's that sort of system, and so in between the wars, that's tended to happen. With French governments. But if you zoom out of that, if you don't know about that, French defence policy seems fairly decided. You don't spend all that money on a thing like the Maginot Line if people aren't generally agreed on what they want to do, if there isn't a hard through line in policy, which despite, you know, chaotic governments, despite this endless turnover of governments, that seems like quite a singular decision that's been made and stuck to regardless, which I think is another way of looking at France and French defence policy between the war. They're absolutely certain that the Germans are going to be their next big problem, and they are pretty much right away. All of Versailles is geared to the fact the French are worried about the Germans. The First World War doesn't end with the French thinking, well, that's never going to happen again. Best not prepare for it in the way that the British do. You know, the British, after all, have the 10-year rule. Churchill picking a number out of the hat. Giving the Treasury what they want, downsizing imperial responsibilities. The French are very much, well, we need a great big army of poilus, of conscripts. We just need one, and we need an enormous fortress system. And given that their governments are so sort of a crazy paving, I think it's very interesting that they're kind of that singular on their defence posture towards Germany.
Yes, I suppose that the kind of, you know, one of the things that's holding them back is the fact that politically, psychologically, whichever way you want to look at it, you can't fight on French soil again, because you had that in 1914 to 1918, and it was a catastrophe, and the bloodstained style of Verdun and the Marne and all the rest of it. I mean, you know, it's just not going to happen. And the fact that Germany kind of invaded their industrial heartland in the north, you know, all around Lille and all that kind of stuff. So, absolutely, the policy is to not build massive defences along the border. But what we're going to do is, the moment the Germans attack, we're going to hinge and we're going to pivot into Belgium. But because because Belgium's neutral and won't let us in there, we can't do that until the Germans make the first move. And that's a fundamental problem, because they've got this policy of being incredibly slow and methodical. And so... Yeah,
But it's interesting, though, isn't it, that their entire posture is that Germany's the threat.
Yeah,
there is no, you know, the idea that what you do is in, you know, post Second World War, the idea that what you do is embrace Germany and you stop this ever happening again is certainly not on the French radar. And in a strange way, they're consistent, even though the governments themselves are inconsistent. The defence posture, the spending, the whole thing is a consistent thing. And by the late 30s, is also echoing Chamberlain's sort of fortress Britain rearmament idea that, you know, that there's this deterrent force of the United Kingdom off the coast of Europe that will surely make the Germans think again. And the French are building up because by 1939, the French have rearmed, haven't they?
They have, and they have this amazing.
They're comprehensively ready for it, aren't they? And they've got an enormous army they can raise. I mean, this is the thing. The state of the French army in 1939 is, in many ways, entirely enviable, right?
Well, they have this system that you have to do national service, And then once you've done national service, you're then in the reserve. And initially, I think it's for sort of 2 or 4 years or something. And it goes all the way back to kind of, from down to 16 years after you finished your service. You're then at kind of, you're at the fourth wave. So the first wave are the people who've only just finished their national service. Then the second wave is kind of, those who were kind of 8 years ago, and then all the way back to 16 years. And what that means is when you have complete mobilization, which of course is what they launched right at the beginning of September, within a matter of days, you've suddenly got an army of 3 million or something from a standing start of 1.2, I think was what it was on the standing army.
I mean, that's
a big old army.
That's the kind of thing that's the kind of thing the Nazi state would be green with envy at their ability to do that. And after all, a military service in France since the revolution is directly tied to citizenship. This is why they're able to conscript. This is why politically it's not impossible. Whereas, of course, in Britain, it's always been a hot potato. A standing army is a problem in itself. By the interwar years, you've reached the period where the British state has so many commitments all over the world. It can have a standing army because it's all over the world, rather than just sat in England, burning money off. The Germans would give their eye teeth for a system like that, wouldn't they? I mean, the French army in many ways is the envy of the world, which is what makes happen the following year so ironic, isn't it?
Well, yes, and they, even in the beginning of September 1939, they've got double the number of artillery pieces that the Germans have, if not more. They've certainly got considerably more tanks and bigger tanks and more coming through. I mean, don't forget, by current terminology, France is a superpower and is highly industrialized. So that's not a problem.
Yeah,
I was thinking about all this over the weekend because I was recalling reading in the Times newspaper and other newspapers back in February this year, before the invasion, there were lots of infographics, and it had a little image of sort of soldiers, and then had a little image of jets, and then had a little image of guns and tanks and whatever. And you were kind of sort of comparing Ukraine to Russia, and obviously Russia was kind of off the radar, and Ukraine didn't have really, really very many. But here we are, 7 months on, and the Ukrainians have just won an incredible victory. I mean, the Russians are in retreat, and that seems extraordinary. And how can this be so? And I was thinking, it's not all about numbers. And if ever you want an example of it not being all about numbers, of course, it's the opening stages of the war in the West. It's the fact that France loses in effectively 5 days, but in 6 weeks. But it's all over by the 15th of May, 5 days after the attack is launched. So how can that be? And of course, there's other things that come into play. And I suddenly came up with the 3 M's, which is method, motivation, and morale. And actually, and all of them are inextricably linked, but they are different. So first of all, you go to method. So what's your method? Well, the French method in 1939/1940 is have a series of assumptions, which first of all is that the Germans won't be able to move more than to the French border in anything less than 10 days at the absolute quickest. But more likely 2 weeks, which then gives them time to organise themselves to work out where the attack is coming, get their mobile reserves and move them. But this is all based on, so the whole idea is that the Germans are going to operate slowly, so we can operate slowly. But they haven't got the method to be able to move they've got railway lines, they've got trucks, they've got all that kind of stuff, but they haven't got the communications to be able to pull that off. And they haven't got the method to be able to respond to a situation which is different to their assumption. And that's the big problem. It's the fact that, there aren't any radios at the Château de Vincennes, which is the headquarters of the Commander-in-Chief, Maurice Gamelin. It's the fact that all the generals are really old. I mean, Gamelin, I think, is 67, something like that. Weygand, when he takes over on the 23rd of May, whatever it is, 23rd of May, is 73. General Georges is in his 60s. Blanchard is in his 60s. They're all just a little bit kind of slightly over the hill, and they're slightly stuck in the kind of First World War methodology. So you could argue that their method's not very good. Then you've got motivation. Well, the motivation isn't really there because there's no urgency to go into, the Saarland kind of demonstration, which is literally
which is the motivation reflects itself in method, that you create the method that
this
fits
is what I'm
your
saying.
motivation.
They're all linked.
Yeah.
So your method is your plan of action, how you organise yourself. It's logistics. Yeah. It's the method. It's your method of war, which encapsulates a whole host of things. Yeah, and as you say, then you've got the motivation. Well, the motivation's not there because if the motivation had been there, they'd have all just gone straight in. And what's really interesting, when you look at accounts of French soldiers who have been sent to the front, they don't want to go to the front. They don't want to leave their homes and families and baby girls and all the rest of it. And there's tearful farewells on the doorstep and stuff. But they recognise that this is something they've got to do. They go over to the kind of, the western, the eastern border around the Saarland, for example, into Alsace and Lorraine, and they're all along the border there. And they're just sitting there, and they're just going, what's going on? Why aren't we going in? Why aren't we going into Germany? So they're actually quite up for it to start off with, but the motivation from the top is not there, and the consequence of that is that morale then starts to dip very, very quickly because suddenly it's winter. And it all goes, all goes pear-shaped. So by the time the Germans do attack the following May, everyone's fed up. Nothing's happened. It's the phony war. People have, more people have died. The numbers of kind of, equivalent to trench foot and frostbite and all the rest of it is, absolutely through the scale. It's just horrendous. So then for your morale plummets. And then if you look at Russia in February 9, their method's wrong. That no Schwerpunkt. They've spread themselves too thin. Their intelligence picture on Ukraine is incorrect. Their logistics base is poor. They haven't got that sorted out. They've gone into the war with a whole load of assumptions which prove to be untrue. Their motivation is questionable, and as a consequence, all of that, morale plates a plummet, and they're in a pickle that they're in now.
Yeah. These comparisons, I mean, always caution against these comparisons because they can only go so far. But
the principles, it's about principles.
But they're a circle, aren't they? Because it's morale in the high command that says, well, what we can't do is fight an offensive war in the French instance. So that becomes your method, which then becomes your motivation, which then feeds your morale. And if your poilu's morale is bad, you can't do anything other than a Sitzkrieg method. If your soldiers have poor morale, you can't go on the offensive. Yeah. So you might as well stick on the defensive. And those things feed each other almost perfectly. Yeah. Soldiers with poor kit tend to have poor morale because they don't trust the kit, and that to them is a message from the people who are in charge of them that they don't care about them enough to give them the good kit. So why would you spend your life for those people? And
so the method is the poor kit. The motivation is that you haven't got your motivation correct. And the consequence is the morale takes a dip. Yeah. So I agree. I think the three M's is a circle.
It's fairly useful. Yeah. And you see it again and again. In North Africa, the Gazala line battles, people don't trust their kit. They don't trust the method. They don't trust the tanks. So the method
is incorrect.
They don't trust the method, and their motivations for the method are wrong. The method is a poor reflection of motivation and delivers bad morale, and therefore the method fails. And round it goes, and I think it's really, really interesting because that essentially is the sort of it's a Mobius strip, really. Everything has its two sides, but it's the one side of getting that blend right. And the BEF in 1939. The French army, because the French army is the point at which everything folds in 1939. In 1940, rather. So there's 5 days where France falls and where they fail, and you can place that on the French army. And what was very interesting was at We Have Wastefest, when I asked about setbacks and setbacks in the British Army. Is it the setbacks that are created by the poor morale, or the poor morale that creates the setbacks? Yes. And Jonathan very much thinks that it's poor morale that's the chicken that's laying the egg. He says that in 1939, 1940, the BEF doesn't have itself doesn't have its relationship with its soldiers sorted out. So its morale is poor. It doesn't have a clear motivation. It doesn't have a clear aim. And that's why in the end, it can't perform as well as it ought to in 39-40. And certainly by the spring of 1942, that whole relationship is shot and needs completely rebuilding. But the thing is I
think that applies much more strongly to Norway than it does to France. Because I think the BEF in France actually performed pretty well. I mean, you've got your forebears at Hazebrouck.
Yeah, but they perform well apart from their entire strategic concept failing completely. I mean, this is the
yes, but individual units perform quite well. I mean, when they're falling back from the Dial, the River Dial, they're falling back because the Belgians on their left are falling back, and on the French on the Ninth Army or whatever it is on the right. I mean,
but there's a clarity in motivation when your back's to the wall, right?
Yes, but what I'm saying is I would agree that, at times morale is questionable, but I think actually the BEF perform pretty well because when they have to, they absolutely trump. So, I'm thinking about the Grenadier Guards at the Escaut, for example, at Cassel, the defence of the perimeter. I mean, it's all absolutely stupendously good. The counterattack at Arras, it's a bit of a shit show, but even so, they do quite well considering.
I regard these as crumbs of comfort, Jim.
It is a disastrous campaign, but Norway is truly disastrous. I mean, not from a naval point of view, but the bit around Lillehammer in the centre. These unprepared TA battalions sent in. The shipping that's been sent over with them. They've all put their eggs in one basket, so they're coming out there with no guns. They're just infantry with Brens and Lee Enfields. I mean, it's just absolutely hopeless.
Well,
they haven't got any air support. The whole thing just hasn't been worked out at all. It doesn't work in any way.
Well, and the ignominy of that is greater because they've been talking about Norway since the war began. They've been kicking the idea around of intervening in Norway since the war has started, and yet when it comes to it, they haven't given it any thought. I mean, the BEF have this terrible problem that, from the point of view of like a command and soldiering point of view, for the officers in charge, the brass, is that the army's been massively expanded with this huge influx of territorial soldiers, and obviously you've got to do that. You've got to mobilise your territorial battalions and all that. But basically, now the army's going, oh crap! It was hard enough organising ourselves and figuring out what we're going to do. And we're a mechanised army on paper as a regular army, but now there's all these extra people. No, we can't possibly be. It's impossible. Which is why again you end up seeing buses being used and all that sort of stuff to get people to France. And through France once they're in France. So there's this with Norway. The absolute ignominy is that they should have. Having talked about going to Norway for all that time, they should have at least put some planning into it. But with the BEF, sort of the road to hell's paved with good intentions. That expanding the BEF, having it, the idea that it's mechanised, the idea that it's going to fight this defence in depth with its 2-pounders and all that sort of stuff. But it doesn't have enough. There aren't enough of these guns, and you've got Brooke inventing emplacements and trying to figure out a way of making the most of his resources and all that stuff. And then you have that they're going to fight a defence in depth, but then they decide to advance and into Belgium because after all,
because you advance to
Belgium
defend,
hasn't been
advance to do their defence.
Exactly. Yes, exactly, and all that sort of stuff. Exactly, but I just sort of think again your 3 M's there.
Well, I think they work quite well.
Your 3 M's there. I think they do work well.
Well,
we'll take a break. We'll be back in a moment. No, let's take a break. Hold that thought, Jim. We'll be back in a second. Welcome back to We Have Ways of Making You Talk with me, I'm Murray and James Holland. James Holland was holding a thought.
Well, I'm holding 2 thoughts, actually. First of all, I'm holding the thought of Poland in 1939, which is what we were supposed to be talking about in the first place. And the fact that... but we it's up to us what we talk about, right? That's how it goes. So I was thinking about the Germans. So the method is good enough in 1939. There's obviously cases where numbers do count and they overwhelm. And that's what happens to Poland, not just from Germany, which is attacking on 3 points, 3 very obvious Schwerpunkts, concentrations of force. It's not that the Poles do have some better kit. They have a tank which is better than the Panzer Is and Panzer Is, but not enough of them. They've only got like 600 or something. They're just not enough. And the Air Force is behind the times compared to the Luftwaffe, and they haven't really got any answers. And then, of course, on the 17th of September, the Soviet Union, the Red Army invades as well. So from the other side, so from the Polish point of view, they've got the motivation. And they've got the morale to start off with. They don't have the method because they don't have enough of what they need to be able to do what they need to do. The Germans are absolutely not the finished article by any stretch of the imagination. And actually, they almost run out of ammunition, which I think is really, really interesting, which prompts this huge ammunition crisis over the winter of 1939, which is when Hitler, after the then says, I want to invade France immediately. Everyone's going, you can't, we haven't got enough shells. And again, with a comparison, that's sort of slightly what's happened to Russia.
Well, and again, that's muscle memory for the First World War, because there's the ammunition crisis in 1914 in Germany.
Yes, of course.
As well,
yes.
They run out of ammunition. So basically, your civil service, and after all, the thing to remember is that states have all this muscle memory from all the European states have muscle memory from the First World War. That the politicians, that something will come across Hitler's desk going, we haven't made enough bullets, boss, and it'll come from some civil servant rather than from a Nazi apparatchik. So they then have to. He gets very nervous about that. Hitler starts to take that very, very seriously, the ammunition shortage, and because after all, Hitler's method is quick. Let's talk about Hitler's 3 M's. Hitler's method is cheap and quick victories that can be achieved fast, so that the political cost is propping himself up, and his morale, after all, is sky high for quite a while. That then leads to his method of taking bigger and bigger gambles.
Exactly that.
To motivate his ongoing. It's an incredibly useful way of looking at things, Jim.
Well, and again, if you look at motivation, motivation is to win back lands, which from the way the Germans are presenting it is entitled to be theirs. It was theirs since 1795, and they want it back. And there's lots of German-speaking people, and you can't have East Prussia separated. That's just ridiculous. Of course, we've got to have that back. So the Danzig corridor, blah blah blah. There's plenty of motivation, and as you say, morale is sky high because they've been fed this stuff, and everything they've done so far has been brilliant.
Well,
from Sudetenland to Czechoslovakia to the whole shebang.
Yeah, and nothing succeeds like success. It's the right. It is very much what happens to the German method, isn't it? Is that they get completely high on their own supply. And when we talked about Barbarossa, that idea that they war, and it's Paulus who does it. They war game it, and he says this is impossible. He's told to go away and come back with a war game that works. Yeah, that by that point, their notion of success, their ability to deliver success, has unmoored itself from reality completely, hasn't it? You could take on smaller opponents like Poland, and although I suppose France is the thing that beguiles the Germans completely, isn't it?
Absolutely. And again, there, it's the kind of apogee of method, motivation and morale. But because the method is absolutely superb compared to the opposition that they're facing. And it's an absolute classic example where numbers really count, but they don't, then, getting your method and your motivation, your morale correct is a force multiplier. And that absolutely, to use some kind of modern military jargon, and that absolutely proves the case in this case, because they only have half the artillery pieces that the French have. And that's just the French. When you add the Belgians and the Dutch and the British as well, they're way behind, and they're way behind on tanks. And actually, they've only got parity in aircraft. But again, their method is so right. The logistical chain, operational art, absolute clarity of what they've got to do, how they're going to use the forces they have, i.e. using these all arms armored units to be your strike force, to be the tip of the spear, and this incredibly long wooden shaft following behind, of lesser trained troops, of less well equipped troops, but providing the backup and your ability to maintain that effort at the front, which is so essential. And motivation, smash France very quickly. Morale, sky high, because they're all absolutely believing it, and everyone knows what they've got to do. And
well, but you see, what was interesting with talking to Jonathan was he said that third point he thinks is the crucial element in 1940 for the Germans, because he says, you read German morale reports, they're not all going, this brilliant new method of warfare we have devised that we've all been informed of.
Yes, apparently it's called Blitzkrieg.
Apparently it's called Blitzkrieg. It's panning out very well for us right now. Thank goodness someone has scratched their head and come up with this. They're all just going, should we keep going? Yeah, why not? French seem to be in real trouble here. Let's just keep pushing on.
How cool is this?
Going. Oh, They've withdrawn from here. I don't believe it. Let's make the most of that. And that's motivation and morale manifesting themselves as method. And that whatever method you've got, and again, you need all three to work for all three to work.
Yes. Yes. Well,
you know,
and then let's fast forward just a couple of months, and suddenly it's the summer of 1940.
Yeah.
And look at the Luftwaffe. The Luftwaffe have greater numbers. So to go back to that infographic idea of your little picture in the Times showing who's got what.
Yeah.
So the infographic, Germans sold all the aces. They've got more planes. They've got more bombers. They've got on paper the best single engine fighter in the world at the time. Can do all those things that you need to do. Climb faster than anything else. Dive faster than anything else. All that kind of stuff. Got cannons and machine guns. Tick tick tick. What's their method though? Their method is really poor. They've underestimated British defence. They don't have no concept of the air defence system. Tactics are bad. Operational level is suspect because aircraft production is getting lower again, so they're not getting enough replacements for the losses. They're having to hustle themselves up to the front and put all these fighter planes in the Pas-de-Calais in a very, very dense area, which makes them very target rich for the RAF bombers coming over, because they're all condensed in one place, unlike the RAF where their fighter fields are all kind of spread all over the place. So the method is poor. Yeah. The motivation, don't really know what they're doing. It's kind of, what's this for? Is this to kind of politically force Britain out of the war, or are we militarily forcing Britain out of the war? Are we going to do an invasion? Yeah. Well, we don't really like that because we haven't actually got any invasion barges, and we'll have to get them from the Rhine, and that's not cool. And so the motivation is kind of really suspect, and then morale very rapidly starts to take a dip. And again, one can tell that from looking at those transcripts of Luftwaffe officers at Trent Park who are putting the rooms together. And you can see that the morale, from in July and when they're captured in July, it's like, we're going to whip their asses and we're going to cross and it's going to be great. We're going to be in London, but, last one to kind of Liverpool's a rotten egg. And then you see it just dip as their numbers dip. And as they realise as the months pass, as August makes way to September and September makes way to October, and there's still plenty of Spitfires, still plenty of Hurricanes, that this is just not working. The weather's starting to turn and the whole thing's gone absolutely pear-shaped. It's like, now what? And they're all knackered. They're flying, some of them are flying. I remember Ulrich Steinhilber flying 7 sorties a day. I mean, that's just absurd. Absolutely absurd. That's way too much. It's 5 more times than anyone should be flying, probably 6 times more than anyone should be flying in a single day. And so consequently, morale takes a massive dip. And the converse is the method is the thing that actually is one of the key moments of the entire war, because we've got, Britain's got the air defence system. The method is absolutely superb. I mean, you can't really fault it.
Yeah.
So therefore, the motivation is high because everyone knows what they've got to do. Whether you're a pusher of plots at the plotting table in Duxford or at Uxbridge or at Drem in Edinburgh, or whether you're a pilot, or whether you're an ERC, or whether you're part of the civilian repair organisation, or an observer corps, everyone knows what they've got to do. Everyone knows why they're doing it. Everyone knows that the future of Britain, the free world, is at stake. So the motivation is absolutely tip top. The whole thing starts to work. So morale is really high. We win.
Yeah. I mean, you could. The thing is again, we don't know what's going on in Ukraine, in the Kharkiv Oblast, but you could say that clearly the Russian method has failed them, because after all, it's the interaction of your 3Ms and his 3Ms, the other side of the hill's 3Ms, that's the important, the really critical bit. That you can't just look to your own; you've got to look to what the other side are doing, and that, after all, that's part of your method is gleaning what the other side's 3Ms are too. That
of course.
You need to, because I think what's very interesting,
because otherwise your method's the wrong method, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Well, he's been talking about the smartphone, and he's saying he thinks the interaction of the smartphone in modern warfare means that this is what I'm taking from what he's saying, is that basically, if you want to convey victory, you do it through smartphone, through Telegram, through TikTok, and that also means panic has an ability to spread through an army in a way that is novel and far. It goes at light speed now in a way that, rumors of a formation, the other side of your neighbouring formation going under, now reach you immediately rather than by a gradual process or seeing some of them. Or 2 days later, you're seeing some of them come back through your lines, and they're going, bloody hell, it's terrible out there. What happens now is you get your phone goes, and it's your brother-in-law, in some motorised battalion up the road, going, this has all gone to shit, and obviously the Ukrainians seem to have fought. I mean, of course, we only know from one side, seem to have fought a better information war. Their information method is better. I mean, it's interesting. I had lunch with the colonel at the weekend, and
did he? How was he?
He was very well, and we got talking about, in the late 70s, he was a watchkeeper in British Army on the Rhine, right? And if people don't know what a watchkeeper is, it's basically you're part of the intelligence cell in Corps headquarters, and what you do is you keep track of all the intel as it comes in, and eventually, I think on the hour, you brief the general as to what's going on, and they do these big exercises, and they'd have a scrambled phone to the German corps on their or division or whatever, who's under their command on their left flank or whatever, and then they'd have to deal with Americans coming in and briefing the Americans. And he said there was a very funny occasion where General Womble a guy called Womble came in to be briefed and couldn't understand why everyone was laughing at him in the 70s because
the Womble TV series.
Couldn't figure out what the big joke was. And also that all the Americans were like these sort of, they were all super fit, super lithe. He said that there was one guy comes in, he's a complete blade. The man is 100% blade. The bloke's a deadly weapon. He's got such a sharp mind. And then all the British officers, sort of pot-bellied chaps in their jerseys, going, "I say, old boy, what should we do on this exercise, then, old chap?" And the Americans going, "I want the sit rep information stat," and all this sort of thing. The culture clash was but. What their job was one of the things Dad used to do is he was involved in, and he's on the Imperial War Museum spoken archive talking about his years in service if people are interested. But he talks about this, and what he did is he tried to assemble as much information about the Russian formations they expected they were going to encounter, and what their equipment was, and therefore which unit had which equipment, so what you could expect from it if it came at you, and whether that meant they're a recce force or a shielding force, or whether they were the main effort, and what the biography of their commanding officer was, so where he sat politically, what his motivation was likely to be, and what the individual Soviet Republic breakdown of that outfit was. So they're basically their political affiliation. So if you had a unit with lots of Ukrainians in, it might not fight as stiffly as one with just Russians in, and all the officers are anyway. But what's fascinating about that, I said, but this is it. This is before the internet. This is the closed information age. So they're getting stuff from Russian military publications, from what they know from Bricksmiss, who are the people going around East Germany in Land Rovers, who were allowed, British Army, who were allowed to drive around East Germany, part of the post-war settlement in Germany, but basically listening to everything and going and sitting and taking long range photos of units in East Germany, all that sort of stuff, right? And all that intel's assembled. You compare that with now, where we live in an open information age, where you look, if anyone's following Bellingcat, what they're able to do, how they were able to track down the exact rocket launcher that shot MH17 down, that you're able in this modern information age to do that. What's striking is it looks like the Ukrainian method for using information is very well organised, and I expect they're getting a ton of help.
Yeah.
And the Russian way of organising their information seems so piss poor. And given that the Russians are fighting an open society and aren't one themselves, you'd think they'd have the upper hand in an information war, because they're the more closed society who can guard their secrets more carefully. Yeah. And the Ukrainians are in theory, although it's a war, so it's probably not as open as it was. But you know what I mean? And I think it's really, really interesting that clearly in the Cold War, the struggle was finding out anything about the Russians. And they could, of course, one of the points about, American U-2 spy missions during the Cold War is you couldn't go to the middle of Russia. You couldn't just get in a car. You couldn't go to Russia and drive in a car the way that you could in America. You could drive to a missile site and as close as you could get. Just hire a car and go. You couldn't do that in Russia. And that these open and closed societies. And what's interesting is that, if you take that again back to the Second World War, with Russia and with the Soviet Union and Germany, you've two essentially closed societies fighting each other. And then the Western Allies, Britain and America, essentially open societies. And some might argue that that's a force multiplier in itself. If you're an information-free a society where information is transmitted and passed around more openly, you have more of a chance. Whereas if you're closed and your information's all siloed or all kept in the hands of different rival factions, which is what happens in Germany after all, you're creating friction in your own information system. Yeah.
Yes, and also it's all bubbling into one point, isn't it? So once that the cork is released, it all kind of bursts out and it's completely uncontrollable. I mean, what's interesting though, if you probably, I mean, we know that the Russia, whatever you say, we don't know what's going on 100% going on in Ukraine by any stretch of imagination, but we do know that the Russian method has not been good.
But we know they're bugging out.
We know they're bugging out. We know that the Russian method has not been good. The motivation for an awful lot of conscript Russian troops. What's the motivation for going into Ukraine? Very, very small, very low. And of course, if you don't feel you're getting the right kit and your truck is breaking down because it hasn't got the right battery or hasn't got the right tires or whatever, that also then your motivation is not good in the first place. And then that, of course, that then affects your morale. So again, you're in that, you're in that loop, and we can see enough to know that those things are all breaking down.
Yeah.
And I think once you break that circle, if you see motivation, if you see method, motivation, morale as one continual circle, once you get a gap in it, the whole thing starts to, it unravels as a circle, doesn't it? Well, the circle needs to be kept
exactly.
complete.
Exactly. And sometimes what you have to do is while you're waiting to get your method right, and we could be talking about 1942 in the desert here, while you're waiting for your method to come round, you have to work very, very hard on your motivation and morale.
Yes.
So that the method, because your methods require evolving often enough because they involve all sorts of problem solving that you didn't know you were going to have to do. Yeah. And what's interesting about 1942 is they hang on, the British are able to just hang on long enough with their motivation and morale for the method to appear.
Yes, but the reason is that one of the great reasons that is the Desert Air Force saving their bacon as they're retreating back to the Alamein line from Tobruk. And that's because their method, motivation and morale are absolutely tip-top.
Yeah.
I'm quite taken with this theory. We've just developed a military theory. It's quite exciting.
But it's a Mobius strip. It's two sides and one side. It goes round perfectly on itself.
Yes,
doesn't it? It's the thing. And if you can't enact your method if your motivation and morale are crap.
No. Yeah.
And your motivation is compromised by either method or morale.
Yes.
Yeah.
No, so it's quite neat. Anyway, well, that's probably enough for today, isn't it? Next week,
I think so.
Next week, I'm going to be in the USA.
Yeah, fantastic.
On Thursday, so that's exciting. Yeah. Going to see James M. Scott. Going to see the Mark Clark Archives in the Citadel. Then Bedford, Virginia.
Great
and then
American
Washington.
Eagle.
I'm doing a talk in Washington now, which is fun, with the Churchill Society or something. I'll get the details. I don't know, actually. They just said, would I do a kind of a casual pub talk? I said, yeah. All right.
The 3 M's, Jim. It's the 3 M's.
Maybe I'll talk about 3 M's. God, this is really got something going here.
Yeah. But I think motivation, if your back's to the wall, that's motivation enough, isn't it? I think that's what's happening in the summer of 1940 with the BAF, where they fight well, I think. Yep. I think the people who do well, it's because you're shit or bust at that point. I don't think... anyway.
Hold on, just very quickly, but if you think about American US Army 1945, method, absolutely tip-top. Motivation, yes, get it over and done with as quickly as possible. Morale, just good enough to hang in there.
Well, yeah, that's the really interesting thing, is they're starting to run out of the third... That tank is lowering.
Yes, and I wonder how jeopardizing that is. And that's one of the motivations for then using the atomic bomb in Japan, isn't it?
Yeah, there we go. There we go.
We're onto something here, aren't we? Let's get run and run.
Well, take credit, Jim. It was your idea. Anyway, thanks very much for listening, everybody. We will see you soon. James will be stateside. I'll be in a local theatre near you coming soon, I expect.
Excellent.
I've got Lincoln. What have I got this week?
Oh,
I've got
I love Lincoln.
Then
Lincoln's
I've got
great city.
two in Bracknell, then 2 in Winchester.
I'll tell you what,
and Richmond on Sunday.
Brilliant. You'll get strong IC support in Lincoln.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. Well, if we can squeeze the time in, I might go and see the International Bomb Command thing. But we'll at some point. Yeah. Anyway,
right.
Thanks for listening, everybody. We'll see you soon. Bye bye.
Cheerio.